blood and honor. The sound of synchronized bootsteps echoes through the pristine corridor of the Imperial Star Destroyer Indomitable. I remember my first day aboard with a clarity that haunts me still. The sharp smell of industrial cleaners masked something underneath. Death, perhaps, or fear, impossible to tell which. 500 of us arrived that morning, fresh-faced, ambitious, already accomplished in our Imperial careers. None of us knew why we had been selected. I stood at perfect attention as our transport shuttle docked, my uniform pressed to regulation standards. My credentials as Lieutenant Carvin Dre of the Imperial Army verified 3 separate times before boarding. The shuttle door hissed open to reveal a reception committee of stormtroopers in formation, white armor gleaming under the hangar lights. Between them stood a single figure in crimson, motionless, silent. The red robes cascaded to the floor in perfect symmetry around polished boots. The helmet revealed nothing, not even a suggestion of eyes behind the narrow black visor. A royal guard. The stories about them filled late-night conversations among ambitious officers, how they never spoke, how they killed without hesitation, how no one knew what they looked like beneath those helmets. They were faceless extensions of Emperor Palpatine himself. His will made manifest, his protection guaranteed through their unwavering vigilance. The most elite fighters in the galaxy, and one stood before us now. The stormtrooper captain stepped forward. "Welcome to selection. You are here because the Emperor requires guardians. You believe yourselves exceptional. You are not. You are raw material at best. Most of you will fail. Those who fail will not return to your former posts." I remember scanning the faces around me. Some showed fear, others determination. A few smiled with the confidence of men who could not imagine failure. Those ones always broke first. "Follow the Royal Guard to your quarters. You, begin evaluation immediately." The crimson figure turned without acknowledging us. Silent, purposeful. We followed in formation across the hangar bay, our footsteps a disordered cadence against the precisely measured pace of our guide. I did not know then what waited beyond those blast doors. I could not comprehend the process designed to break us down, to rebuild us, to transform us from men into weapons. The barracks contained nothing but identical bunks, no personal items permitted, no names used. From that moment we became numbers. I was 37. We received no uniforms beyond simple grey fatigues, with our numbers stenciled across the chest. No rank, no history, no identity. The doors sealed behind us with the heavy sound of magnetic locks engaging. Several retention codes activated in sequence. Imperial Security Protocol RG7119, the first of many procedural details I would learn. Red lights activated above each door. Surveillance was continuous. We were prisoners as much as candidates. Our first test began with simple endurance. No food, no water, no sleep permitted. Guards entered at random intervals to ensure compliance. Anyone caught sitting received immediate punishment. After 24 hours standing at attention, the first man collapsed. They removed him without comment. I never saw him again. The thought of failure terrified me more than the trial itself. I had worked too hard to rise through Imperial ranks to falter now. My father had served the Republic. His position in naval logistics transferred smoothly to Imperial service after the Clone Wars. I grew up surrounded by the ideology of order, of purpose, the concept that without firm control the galaxy would descend into chaos. My entire life was preparation for service. I believed then that selection was my chance to fulfill that purpose. To stand at the pinnacle of Imperial power, I watched as more candidates fell. By the 40-hour mark, 30% had been culled. Those remaining stood with vacant expressions, swaying slightly, fighting biological imperatives. I focused on my breathing, controlled my muscles through deliberate tension and release. Techniques learned during survival training. The taste of copper filled my mouth. My lips cracked from dehydration. The persistent ache in my lower back grew from discomfort to agony. I remained standing. When water finally came, it was a small cup placed on the floor. To drink required breaking position, reaching down, showing weakness. Some rushed forward, discipline broken by desperate thirst. Guards recorded their numbers. Those men vanished the next hour. I waited until most had taken their water, observed which candidates received punishment and which did not. The pattern became clear. Those who maintained dignity were permitted to drink. Those who scrambled like animals were removed. I approached slowly, knelt with precision, consumed the water in measured sips, returned to position without spilling a drop. Sleep came in 90-minute increments, never enough to reach deep rest, just enough to prevent complete collapse, always interrupted by alarms, by shouted commands, by physical inspections that required immediate response, time lost meaning, days blurred together under artificial light that never dimmed. I remember the constant hum of the ventilation system, the smell of too many bodies confined in too small a space, the way we stopped speaking to each other, conserving energy, retreating into ourselves. The next phase separated us by twos. Combat trials. No rules except victory, no weapons except what we could improvise. My opponent was Candidate 62, a former Spec Force operative with arms thick as support struts. I remember his eyes, bloodshot, desperate. He knew as I did that only one of us would continue. He attacked without hesitation, direct, powerful. Exactly what the observers expected from his profile. I let him come, absorbed the first strike against my forearm. The pain blossomed sharp and immediate. I used his momentum to unbalance him, a technique from Ichani martial forms practiced in secret during my time at the academy, not regulation Imperial combat methods. The surprise showed on his face as I slipped past his guard, my elbow connected with his temple, not enough to finish, just enough to disorient. His second attack came wider, sloppier. I stepped inside his reach, struck 3 precise blows to nerve clusters along his torso. He collapsed to his knees, vulnerable. The observers waited, expected me to finish him. To show the necessary ruthlessness, I hesitated, a fraction of a second, an almost imperceptible moment of restraint. But they saw it, recorded it as a potential weakness. I completed the task, rendered him unconscious with a strike to the base of his skull. Precise, efficient. But that moment of hesitation was noted, would return to haunt me later. Selection continued for what I later learned was 3 standard months. The process became our reality. Pain became normal. Hunger became expected. Fear became constant. We adapted. Those who could not adapt disappeared. We never discussed the missing, never acknowledged the dwindling numbers. Each man focused only on survival, on proving worthy of continuing to the next trial. The next test. The next elimination. By the end, only 50 remained from the initial 500. We stood in formation as we had that first day, no longer fresh, no longer confident. Hollow-eyed men with bodies hardened by deprivation and combat. When the blast doors opened, we expected more trials. Instead, we saw 2 royal guards flanking a thin figure in a simple black uniform. His face was deeply lined, eyes sunken into his skull. Director Isan Izard of Imperial Intelligence addressed us without preamble. Candidates, your physical evaluation is complete. Now we begin the real work of creating royal guards. I did not understand then what she meant. I could not comprehend the psychological reconditioning that awaited us. The systematic dismantling of identity, the chemical enhancements, the loyalty programming, the creation of the perfect protectors. I believed the worst was behind us. I was wrong. Our transformation had only just begun. The first change came with our new quarters. Individual cells, 3 meters square, white walls, white floor, white ceiling, a single bunk, a single refresher unit, no windows, no decorations, nothing to focus on except our thoughts, nothing to distract from the voice that began speaking the moment the door sealed. Imperial indoctrination broadcasts were common throughout the military, reminders of duty, of loyalty, of the consequences of failure. What played in those cells was different, personalized. targeted to exploit specific psychological weaknesses identified during our evaluation. My broadcast spoke of my father, revealed details of his service I had never known, suggested doubts about his loyalty, about mine, implied connections to rebel sympathizers. The voice asked questions that required no answer, planted seeds of paranoia, of suspicion. The Emperor knows all, Candidate 37. He sees the hesitation in your heart, the weakness in your resolve. Prove your loyalty. Purge yourself of doubt. Only perfect devotion will be accepted. The voice never stopped. During sleep cycles, it lowered to a whisper. During mealtimes, it commented on my eating habits. During hygiene periods, it noted inefficiencies in my movements. Always watching, always judging. I began to respond to it, to justify myself, to argue against its accusations, then to agree with its assessments, to internalize its messages, to believe. The next phase introduced the masks. Not the full Royal Guard helmet, a simpler device that covered the face completely. No eye holes, no mouth opening, solid metal shaped to the contours of our features. We wore them continuously, learned to navigate by sound, by memory, by instinct, learned to eat through a small port that opened for precisely 10 minutes during each meal period. Learned to sleep without removing them. The masks contained internal speakers that continued the indoctrination. Now we could not escape even by covering our ears. The voice became part of us. The darkness became normal. Combat training intensified. We fought blind, learned to sense opponents through air displacement, through subtle sounds, through the vibrations in the floor. Those who could not adapt were removed. Always the numbers decreased. 30 candidates, 20, finally 12. We became extensions of our weapons. Force pikes, vibroblades, our own bodies honed to lethal precision. We killed training droids by the hundreds, then prisoners condemned to execution. The voice in our masks approved of our efficiency, noted areas for improvement, demanded perfection. Sleep cycles brought new torments. Chemical compounds in our food induced vivid nightmares, scenarios where we failed to protect the Emperor, where we betrayed our oaths, where we removed our masks and found nothing underneath, no face, no identity, just emptiness. We woke, gasping, heart rate spiking. The voice would soothe us, remind us that failure existed only in dreams, that reality permitted no such weakness, that the Emperor protected those who proved worthy. I remember the day my mask was removed after 3 months of darkness. The light blinded me, sent spikes of pain through my skull. When my vision cleared, I faced a mirror. The face looking back was unrecognizable. Gaunt, pale, eyes recessed into dark hollows, skin adhering too tightly to bone structure, a stranger who bore only passing resemblance to Lieutenant Carvin Dre. The voice spoke from external speakers now. Candidate 37, your physical reconstruction begins today. The weakness of your former self will be burned away. The strength of the Royal Guard will replace it. Medical droids approached with injectors. The first compounds burned through my veins like fire. Muscle enhancers, bone density accelerators, pain suppressors that dulled some sensations while heightening others. My body became a battlefield of competing chemicals. I vomited blood, suffered seizures, endured changes that rewrote my physical structure at a cellular level. Through it all, the voice continued, praising my resilience, condemning moments of weakness, reminding me of my purpose, of the honor being bestowed upon me. The 12 remaining candidates underwent transformation together. Some bodies rejected the enhancements. 2 died during the process. Their failures were highlighted as examples of inherent weakness. The survivors watched as their corpses were processed for disposal. Imperial Efficiency Waste Protocol ET-114. The voice reminded us that even in death we would serve the Emperor. Our remains would provide nutrients for hydroponics facilities that fed the Imperial war machine. 10 guards remained. Our training now focused on formation, on moving as a single unit, on anticipating each other without communication. No words were permitted. We developed a silent language of subtle gestures, of minute movements. We learned to read intention from the slightest shift in posture, from the tension in a grip. From the pace of breathing, we became something beyond individual soldiers. A single organism dedicated to a single purpose: protection, security, absolute loyalty. The final test came without warning. During a standard combat drill, the blast doors opened. Director Izard entered with 4 royal guards. The existing guards, the legends. They attacked without preamble, without mercy, full speed, full force, real weapons. The drill became a massacre. I remember the sound of force pikes discharging against durasteel floors, the smell of ozone and burned flesh, the way Candidate 22 fell first, his throat crushed by a precise strike, how Candidate 5 lasted longest, fighting with desperate intensity until a vibroblade found the gap between his protective plates. I survived, through instinct, through the chemical enhancements now fully integrated into my system, through the combat reflexes drilled into muscle memory. I took injuries: a dislocated shoulder, 3 broken ribs, a concussion that left my vision doubled. But I remained standing when the drill ended. Only 6 candidates survived. We stood bleeding, breathing heavily. Director Izard smiled for the first time since selection began. Acceptable. The final phase begins tomorrow. Prepare them for the fitting. The voice in our quarters that night was different. Proud, congratulatory. It spoke of accomplishment, of ascension, of taking our rightful place among the most elite warriors in the galaxy. I slept without nightmares for the first time in months. The pain of my injuries faded beneath a flood of biochemical rewards. My body healed with unnatural speed. The enhancement protocols reaching full effectiveness. The fitting took place in a chamber I had never seen before, gleaming white walls, surgical precision in every detail. At the center stood 6 mannequins draped in crimson. The Royal Guard uniforms, the helmets, the armor, the symbol of our transformation. Director Izard supervised personally as medical droids made final adjustments to our physical forms, subtle surgeries to ensure the helmets fit perfectly, that no distinguishing characteristics remained visible, that we became truly interchangeable, truly anonymous. The process of donning the uniform followed strict protocol. 27 specific steps, each movement precisely defined. The helmet came last, heavy, confining. When it sealed around my head with a soft hiss, the external world changed. Enhanced audio sensors captured sounds beyond normal human range. The visual feed compensated for the limited field of view through the narrow visor. The weight of the force pike in my hands felt right, natural, as though I had carried it my entire life. Director Izard inspected our formation. Her voice came through internal comms with perfect clarity. From this moment you are no longer candidates. You are Royal Guards. You have no name, no past, no future beyond service. You will not speak unless functionally necessary. You will not remove your helmets in the presence of others. You exist only as extensions of the Emperor's will. His protection is your sole purpose. We stood motionless as she circled our formation, her inspection methodical, searching for any flaw, any imperfection. Finding none, she nodded once, satisfied. You begin your duties immediately. Transport to Imperial Center departs in 30 minutes. The Emperor awaits his new guardians. The journey to Coruscant passed in silence. We stood in perfect formation within the transport shuttle, motionless despite turbulence, despite the hours of transit. Our bodies no longer registered such discomforts as worthy of response. The voice in our helmets had changed again, quieter now, more insidious, no longer needing to shout its commands. We had internalized its message so completely that the merest whisper served as reinforcement. I remember our arrival at the Imperial Palace. The scale of it, the overwhelming presence of power concentrated in architecture, in symbolism, in the very air that circulated through its massive halls. We marched in perfect unison behind senior royal guards, our boots striking the polished floors in perfect synchronization, the sound echoing through corridors that had witnessed the fall of the Republic, the rise of the Empire, the consolidation of power under a single will. Courtiers and officials parted before our crimson formation, their eyes never meeting our visors, fear evident in their postures. In their hurried movements to clear our path, we represented something they dared not challenge, the physical embodiment of the Emperor's reach, of his authority made manifest. The throne room waited at the end of our journey. Massive doors swung open to reveal a chamber designed to intimidate. 2. Diminish all who entered before the presence seated at its far end. The Emperor. Smaller than propaganda holos suggested, frailer in appearance, yet radiating a presence that transcended physical form. Power that crackled in the air around him, that pressed against my consciousness even through the helmet's shielding. We assumed our positions along the walls, statues of crimson and black, unmoving, vigilant. I focused on my breathing as instructed. Slow, regular, barely perceptible. My enhanced senses catalogued every detail of the room, every potential threat, every access point, every individual who approached the throne, their postures, their movements, their emotional states, betrayed through micro-expressions and unconscious gestures. I observed it all while appearing to observe nothing. The first day passed in silence, then the next, time measured only by shift rotations, by the changing of guards executed with perfect precision. 4-hour intervals, no breaks, no distractions, no communication beyond the necessary minimum to coordinate protection details. We existed in a state of hypervigilance that would have destroyed ordinary minds, would have broken unaugmented bodies. For us it became normal, expected, the only acceptable standard. I cannot say when I first noticed the dreams changing, when the nightmares of failure transformed into something else, something worse, visions of what waited beneath the other helmets, faces melted away by too long in the masks, empty eye sockets, mouths sealed shut. Sometimes I dreamed of removing my own helmet to find nothing underneath. No face, no identity, just void where Carven Dre had once existed. The voice no longer needed to remind me of my purpose. To reinforce my conditioning, I had become what selection intended, a perfect instrument of the Emperor's will. Yet somewhere deep beneath layers of chemical enhancement and psychological reconditioning something remained, a fragment, a splinter of doubt embedded too deeply to excise completely. I performed my duties without flaw, without hesitation. But the dreams continued. 6 standard months into my service, the first test of our loyalty came. A courtier approached the throne with documents requiring the Emperor's signature. Standard procedure followed hundreds of times. Yet my enhanced senses detected the change in his breathing, the slight tremor in his left hand, the microscopic dilation of his pupils. Warning signs classified under Imperial Threat Assessment Protocol TH-339. I moved before conscious thought formed. 3 precise steps carrying me between the threat and the Emperor. My force pike activated with a subsonic hum. The courtier revealed his true purpose as a vibroblade appeared in his right hand, concealed until that moment in a forearm sheath that had somehow passed security scans, a professional, an assassin who had replaced the real courtier. The entire encounter lasted less than 5 seconds. My pike struck with perfect precision, the discharge rendering the assassin unconscious instantly. Security personnel swarmed the throne room. The other guards maintained position. Only I had moved, had identified the threat, had neutralized it without hesitation. The Emperor watched as the assassin was removed, his yellow eyes fixed on my helmet, not seeing the face beneath, seeing only the perfect function of his creation. "Exemplary," he said, his voice carrying the same quality as the one that had lived in my helmet during training. The source of the conditioning, the architect of my transformation, This one shows promise. The incident elevated my status among the guards. I received assignment to the Emperor's personal detail, the highest honor, the most demanding position. In the presence of Palpatine, the voice in my helmet whispered more urgently, more intensely. His proximity strengthened the conditioning, reinforced the psychological barriers erected during training, yet the dreams worsened. Now they included the assassin. In these nightmares I failed to stop him. Or worse, I joined him, turned my pike against the throne, against my purpose. I woke from these episodes with heart rate elevated to dangerous levels, with stress hormones flooding systems designed to suppress such responses. The medical droids adjusted my chemical balance during maintenance periods, increased suppression compounds, administered additional conditioning. The voice noted my instability, whispered of replacement, of failure, of joining the bodies processed under Protocol ET-114. I redoubled my vigilance, performed my duties with mechanical perfection, suppressed the dreams through sheer will. Through fear of the alternative, I stood unmoving for days, weeks, months, became the red statue the galaxy feared, the silent guardian who witnessed the machinations of an empire without comment, without judgment, without identity. I observed courtiers scheme for position. Military officers report victories and defeats in the ongoing rebellion. Moffs and governors prostrate themselves before Imperial might. I catalogued their weaknesses, their fears, their ambitions betrayed through unconscious tells that my training had taught me to recognize. Information stored but never utilized, never shared. The perfect witness who could never testify. The proximity to such concentrated power affected the other guards differently. Some seemed to absorb the Emperor's cruelty, to internalize his casual disregard for life, his appetite for suffering. During the rare moments when communication between guards was permitted, I noticed changes in their speech patterns, in their thought processes. The conditioning molded each of us according to our base personalities, created variations on the perfect guardian theme. Some became extensions of the Emperor's sadism, others of his calculating intellect, of his paranoia, of his infinite patience. I do not know what aspect of him took root in me, what element of his nature found fertile ground in whatever remained of Carven Dre. I know only that the dreams continued, that the splinter of doubt remained, lodged beneath layers of conditioning, a foreign object that my altered mind could neither expel nor accept, a constant irritation that might one day fester into something worse. The second year of my service brought increased responsibilities, diplomatic missions accompanying the Emperor off-world, special security details when he met with Darth Vader. The tension between Sith Lord and Royal Guards created unique security challenges. Vader viewed us with open contempt, as lesser protectors, unnecessary adjuncts to his own formidable abilities. The Emperor maintained our presence specifically to remind his apprentice of the structures of Imperial power, of the systems that existed independent of their relationship. We were symbols as much as functional guards during those meetings. I recall one such encounter on board the Superstar Destroyer Executor. Vader had returned from an unsuccessful campaign to locate the rebel base. His failure hung in the recycled air between them, a tangible pressure that my sensors registered as dangerous, the kind of tension that preceded violence. That demanded vigilance beyond even our standard protocols. "You disappoint me, Lord Vader," the Emperor said, his voice soft, almost kind. The tone that preceded his most vicious punishments. "Perhaps your focus has been divided. Perhaps your priorities require clarification." Vader remained motionless, the sound of his respirator the only response. Even through the helmet's filtration system I detected the smell of ozone, of energy gathering, of power barely contained. "The Royal Guard will accompany you on your next mission, to observe, to report, to remind you of Imperial methodology." The temperature in the room dropped perceptibly. My environmental controls compensated automatically. Frost formed on exposed metal surfaces. Vader's rage manifested physically in the environment. In that moment, I understood the true purpose of our assignment. Not protection, provocation. The Emperor using us as instruments to test his apprentice's control, his loyalty, his willingness to accept humiliation. As you wish, my master. Vader's vocoder stripped all emotion from the words, left only the mechanical acknowledgement of command. 4 guards received assignment to Vader's next campaign. I was not among them. They never returned. Listed as casualties during an engagement with rebel forces. No bodies recovered, no details provided. The voice in my helmet whispered that they had served their purpose, had been expendable assets deployed to illuminate the relationship between master and apprentice. The knowledge settled in my mind like a stone, a cold weight that sank beneath layers of conditioning but did not dissolve. My duties continued without interruption, without acknowledgement of the lost guards. Their positions filled immediately from the pool of candidates continually undergoing selection. The machine of Imperial power required no mourning, no recognition of sacrifice, only function mattered, only continued service. The voice grew quieter as my conditioning stabilized, as my performance metrics showed consistent excellence. Yet the dreams persisted, evolved. Now they included conversations with the dead guards, with candidates who had failed selection, with the assassin neutralized by my pike. They asked questions I could not answer while awake, about purpose, about choice, about what remained of the man who had once been Carven Dre. I performed my duties without flaw, stood motionless for days at strategic points throughout the throne room, evaluated hundreds of visitors for threat potential, participated in security sweeps executed with mechanical precision, submitted to regular maintenance, to chemical adjustment, to psychological reinforcement, a perfect component in the Imperial machine, until the day I was not. The moment came during a routine security patrol. The Emperor entertained a delegation from a newly subjugated world, their representatives offering formal surrender, traditional gifts, assurances of loyalty. Standard procedure I had witnessed dozens of times. My assigned position placed me behind the throne, watching the supplicants for signs of deception, for the micro-expressions that betrayed hidden intent. One delegate caught my attention, an older human male, distinguished appearance, silver hair cropped in military style, his posture familiar somehow, the angle of his shoulders, the way he clasped his hands behind his back when standing at rest. Details that triggered recognition despite the years, despite the changes wrought by time. Despite the conditioning that should have severed all connections to my past, my father stood before the Emperor, the man whose Imperial service had inspired my own career, whose ideology had shaped my understanding of duty, of order, of sacrifice for the greater stability of the galaxy. I had not seen him since my recruitment to selection, had not communicated in any form, had become officially dead to all who had known Lieutenant Carven Dre. Recognition should have been impossible. The conditioning should have prevented the emotional response that followed. The sudden acceleration of heart rate, the flood of suppressed memories, the fracture in perfect vigilance as my attention divided between duty and the ghost from my former life. The voice in my helmet immediately registered the anomaly, issued corrective commands, increased the flow of suppression compounds through internal systems, reminded me of protocol, of purpose, of the consequences of failure. I fought to regain control, to return to the perfect emptiness of duty, to the absence of identity that defined the royal guard. My father continued his formal address to the throne, his voice steady, professional. Yet beneath the diplomatic language I detected something else. Strain, fear, the subtle indicators of coercion, of speech delivered under duress, the security briefing before the audience replayed in my enhanced memory. This delegation represented a world that had resisted pacification, that had required orbital bombardment before surrendering, that had suffered examples made of its leadership. The Emperor responded with practiced magnanimity, with the appearance of mercy conditional upon absolute compliance. with promises of Imperial investment to rebuild what Imperial weapons had destroyed. The performance I had witnessed countless times, the illusion of benevolence wrapped around a core of calculated cruelty. When my father stepped forward to present the formal document of surrender, I saw the tremor in his hands. The almost imperceptible flinch when the Emperor extended his own wizened fingers to receive the offering. Recognition of evil, of power that corrupted everything it touched. In that moment, something shifted beneath the weight of my conditioning. The splinter of doubt widened, became a crack through which suppressed identity leaked back into consciousness, not enough to break training, to violate duty, but enough to truly see what I had become, what we all had become. Extensions of a will that cared nothing for the galaxy it claimed to bring to order, that recognized no limits to its appetite for control. The audience concluded without incident. The delegation departed under heavy escort. Prisoners in all but name, hostages against their world's continued compliance. I remained at my post, motionless, silent. The perfect guard externally unchanged, while internal systems struggled to contain the breach in conditioning, to repair the fracture before it widened beyond recovery. That night the dreams changed again. My father replaced the usual phantoms, asked questions that echoed my own suppressed doubts, about purpose, about complicity, about the true nature of the order we had both served. I woke to find my hands gripping the helmet, attempting to remove it despite standing orders, despite the conditioning that made such actions nearly impossible. The internal alarms activated immediately, reported the irregularity to central monitoring, to the systems that tracked every aspect of guard performance. The summons came the next morning, not to the throne room but to a smaller chamber used for private audiences. For conversations the Emperor preferred to conduct away from the court, from witnesses. 4 senior royal guards escorted me through corridors I had patrolled countless times. Their formation suggested security rather than honor, contained rather than ceremonial. They considered me compromised, dangerous. The voice in my helmet had gone silent, the worst possible indication. The Emperor waited alone, no courtiers, no other guards, just the frail figure in simple black robes. The hood pulled forward to shadow his face, to hide everything except the yellow eyes that tracked my movement as I approached. That saw through the helmet as though it did not exist. That examined the fractures in my conditioning with clinical interest. "Remove your helmet, guardsman." The command overrode all conditioning against such action in the presence of others. My hands moved without conscious direction, disengaged the seals with practiced motions, lifted the weight from my head. The air against my skin felt strange, wrong. Exposure after years of enclosure, of anonymity. The Emperor studied my face, the physical changes wrought by enhancement, by chemical alteration, by the pressures of confinement within the helmet. His expression revealed nothing, offered no clue to his purpose in this examination. "You recognized the delegate yesterday, a personal connection, a memory that should have been excised during conditioning. Not a question, a statement of fact delivered with precision." With certainty that permitted no denial, I remained silent, awaited judgment for my failure, for the flaw in my perfect service. "Your father served the transition from Republic to Empire with admirable flexibility, adapted to changing political realities without resistance. A useful quality, one I had hoped might prove hereditary." The mention of heredity sent ice through my enhanced systems, the implication that my recruitment had not been random, that my path to the Royal Guard had been designed from the beginning, directed by the same will that now evaluated my continued utility. "The delegate is not your father. A physical resemblance only, a test of your conditioning, one you have failed." The revelation struck with more force than any physical blow, a deliberate triggering of the fracture in my psyche, an exploitation of the weakness identified through constant monitoring, through the dreams reported by my helmet's systems, through the subtle indicators that perfect loyalty remained elusive despite all efforts to ensure it. "Your service record remains exemplary, your combat metrics exceptional. a resource the Empire has invested considerable effort to develop. He paused. Let the statement hang in the air between us. The implicit evaluation of cost against benefit, of continued use against potential risk. You will report to reconditioning, full chemical reset, enhanced loyalty programming. Your value to the throne outweighs the inefficiency of correction. Not execution then, something worse, the complete erasure of whatever remained of Carven Dre, of the fragment of identity that had survived selection, that had persisted despite years of service, of suppression, of the voice that now returned to my internal systems, that whispered of duty, of compliance, of the honor being granted through this opportunity to serve again, to be remade more perfectly in the image required by Imperial need. I replaced the helmet with mechanical precision, resumed the posture of the perfect guard, acknowledged the command with the minimum necessary response. As the Emperor wills, the 4 escorts returned to lead me from the audience chamber, their formation now ceremonial rather than containing. I had been judged, found redeemable, would return to my duties once the flaws had been corrected, once the last remnants of individual identity had been burned away, would stand again in crimson silence beside the throne, would fulfill my purpose as designed. The royal guards exist as extensions of the Emperor's will, as physical manifestations of Imperial power, as silent witnesses to the machinations that shape the galaxy. We have no names, no past, no identity beyond our function. The perfect servants created through selection, through conditioning, through the complete surrender of self to a greater purpose. I am scheduled for reconditioning tomorrow. Full chemical reset, enhanced loyalty programming, the correction of flaws identified during continuous monitoring, the opportunity to serve again with perfect devotion, with unquestioning loyalty, with no memory of the man who once stood within this armor, who once doubted, who once dreamed of something beyond endless service in crimson silence. The voice whispers that I should feel gratitude for this opportunity, for the chance to be remade more perfectly, to continue in the highest service the Empire offers, to stand beside the throne as the galaxy bends to its will, to fulfill the purpose for which I was selected, for which I was transformed, for which Lieutenant Carven Dre ceased to exist. I will report as ordered, will submit to the procedures that will ensure perfect function, will return to my post without flaw, without hesitation, without the dreams that have plagued my service. The voice promises this, reminds me of the honor being bestowed, of the alternatives that await failed guards, of Protocol ET-114 and the processing of resources no longer useful to Imperial purpose. Yet tonight one final dream remains. One last vision before reconditioning erases all capacity for such weakness. See my father as he was before selection, before transformation, before the royal guard consumed whatever once existed of the man who became number 37, who became a crimson statue beside the throne, who witnessed without judgment, who served without question, who protected the architect of galactic suffering with perfect devotion. In this dream he asks what remains behind the mask, what survives beneath the weight of conditioning, what still exists of the son he once knew. I have no answer to give him, will have less tomorrow. After reconditioning completes its work, after the last fracture in perfect loyalty has been sealed, after the final remnant of identity has been excised like diseased tissue, the helmet whispers that such dreams are weakness, that such questions are treason. That perfect service requires perfect emptiness. I stand motionless in my cell awaiting the scheduled procedure, the perfect guard even in private, even in the final hours before whatever remains of Carven Dre disappears completely. Morning arrives with the precision of Imperial scheduling. My escort consists of 2 royal guards and a medical officer. Their formation communicates the nature of my status, not a colleague being assisted, a malfunctioning unit being serviced, a resource requiring maintenance. The voice in my helmet has grown louder during the night cycle, more insistent, reminding me of protocol, of duty, of the honor of continued service after correction. We proceed through corridors restricted to highest security clearance. Subsection JD 117 of the Imperial Palace. The medical facilities where royal guards receive standard maintenance, where chemical balances are adjusted, where conditioning is reinforced, where flawed units are either repaired or repurposed under Protocol ET 114. I have escorted others to these same chambers, have stood guard during their reconditioning, have witnessed their return to service with enhanced compliance, with perfect emptiness behind their expansion visors. The central chamber contains a single chair, metal restraints built into the armrests and legs, a neural interface crown suspended above, delivery systems for chemical compounds arranged with surgical precision. The room smells of antiseptic and ozone, of electricity and sedatives, of fear processed into compliance. Medical droids activate as we enter, their movements precise, efficient, fulfilling programmed functions without hesitation, without judgment, the perfect servants in their own domain. I recognize the lead unit, have undergone maintenance under its supervision 17 times during my service. It acknowledges me with mechanical detachment. Another component requiring adjustment. Nothing more. Remove helmet and armor, it instructs. The vocoder flattens the words into pure function. Prepare for procedure. My escorts step back to observation positions. Their force pikes activated, ready to respond should my compliance falter, should the fracture in my conditioning manifest as resistance, as attempted escape, as anything other than perfect acceptance of necessary correction. I remove the helmet first. The procedure practiced through thousands of repetitions, the seals disengaging with a soft hiss, the weight lifting away, the sensation of exposure immediate and disorienting after so long within its confines. The voice continues despite the physical separation, embedded now in memory, in conditioning so deep it requires no external reinforcement. The armor follows, each piece removed according to protocol. The reverse of the 27 steps required for donning the uniform. The crimson plates stacked with precision on the designated shelf. The undersuit peeled away to reveal the physical changes wrought by years of enhancement. Skin pale from constant coverage, muscle structure densified beyond normal human parameters, injection ports surgically implanted at strategic locations along major veins, points of access for the chemical compounds that maintain peak function, that ensure compliance, that suppress individuality beneath layers of programmed loyalty. I stand naked before the chair, exposed, vulnerable, more uncovered than I have been since selection began, since the transformation from Lieutenant Carven Dre to nameless guardian, to perfect instrument of Imperial will. The medical droid gestures toward the chair, an instruction requiring no verbalization. I comply without hesitation, seat myself with precision, allow the restraints to secure arms and legs, feel the neural interface crown lower to connect with the implants buried beneath my scalp. Procedure commencing. The droid announces. Full chemical reset, enhanced loyalty programming, estimated completion time 14 standard hours. The first compounds enter my system through the injection ports. Cold fire spreading through veins. The familiar sensation of enhancement chemicals but magnified tenfold. The precursors to reconditioning, to the breaking down of neural pathways before rebuilding them according to optimal parameters. My vision blurs as secondary compounds take effect, consciousness beginning to fragment under their influence, the voice growing distant as deeper systems engage. Through the haze I notice movement at the chamber entrance, a robed figure entering without announcement, without escort. The observers straighten to attention, force pikes lowered in salute. Not a medical officer then, someone with authority that transcends standard protocol, someone whose presence commands immediate recognition. My altered vision cannot resolve details, cannot penetrate the hood drawn forward to shadow features, can perceive only the general impression of frailty, of age contained within simple black robes, of power that requires no physical manifestation to dominate every molecule of air within the chamber. The Emperor approaches the chair, observes the procedure with clinical interest, with the detachment of an engineer examining a prototype undergoing necessary modification, his presence unexpected, unprecedented during standard reconditioning. The implication clear: my case represents something beyond routine maintenance, a particular interest, a specific concern requiring direct supervision. Continue recording neural patterns during reset. He instructs the medical droid. This subject demonstrates unusual resistance to standard conditioning. Identify the source for future refinement of protocols. The Emperor circles the chair, studies my face as the compounds take greater hold. As consciousness fractures further under chemical assault, his expression reveals nothing of his purpose, of his interest in this particular flawed guard, in the persistent fragment of identity that has survived when it should have been erased completely. You wonder why I attend personally, he says, the voice matching perfectly the one that has lived in my helmet. In my mind, in my conditioning since selection began, why one guard among hundreds merits such attention. Not a question requiring response, an observation delivered with the expectation of perfect understanding, of recognition that transcends the chemicals now flooding my system. The restraints prevent movement, the compounds prevent speech, yet attention fixes on his words with perfect focus, the result of conditioning that places his voice above all other stimuli, that grants his presence priority over all competing inputs. The flaw in your conditioning reveals a flaw in the process itself, an inefficiency I cannot tolerate. The Royal Guard must function with perfect loyalty, with unquestioning devotion, with no capacity for doubt that might create vulnerability, that might allow external influence to penetrate perfect service. He places one hand on the neural interface crown, fingers tracing the connections with proprietary interest. The touch of an owner examining personal property, evaluating its condition, its continued utility. Your resistance proves more valuable than your service. A test case for enhanced protocols that will ensure no future guard retains such fragments of identity, such capacity for doubt. The chemicals reach maximum saturation, consciousness fragments further, perception reduced to isolated moments between expanding periods of darkness, of dissolution. The voice follows me into that darkness, continues speaking through the void that consumes awareness, that erases time, that dismantles identity beneath waves of targeted compounds. The procedure continues, it says, from everywhere and nowhere, from outside and within simultaneously. Your contribution to Imperial security protocols will outlast your service. The weakness you revealed will strengthen all who follow. The perfect guard emerges only through the identification and correction of imperfection. Darkness consumes all sensory input, erases physical awareness, leaves only the voice continuing its monologue to a consciousness no longer capable of comprehension, of resistance, of anything beyond passive reception of stimulus designed to reconstruct neural pathways according to optimal parameters, according to perfect loyalty, according to unquestioning service. Time loses meaning in the darkness, exists only as the steady introduction of compounds, as the voice that never ceases its instruction, its conditioning, its reshaping of whatever remains into the form required by Imperial need, by the Emperor's will, by the function assigned during selection. When awareness returns, it comes with perfect clarity, with enhanced sensory perception calibrated to optimal parameters, with chemical balance restored to peak efficiency, with loyalty programming reinforced beyond capacity for doubt, for question, for the fracture that required correction. The restraints retract as the neural interface crown rises to its storage position. The medical droid approaches with scanner in hand, evaluates vital signs with mechanical precision. With the detachment of function fulfilled according to programmed parameters, procedure complete, it announces to the empty chamber. Subject demonstrates optimal neural compliance. Chemical balance restored to reference standards. Loyalty programming reinforced to required parameters. My body rises from the chair without conscious direction. Movements guided by conditioning deeper than thought. by protocols embedded in muscle memory, by the perfect emptiness that defines the royal guard. The crimson armor waits on its shelf, each piece aligned with mechanical precision, ready to transform anonymous flesh into symbolic presence, into the physical manifestation of Imperial power, into the silent guardian whose perfect service requires no identity, no doubt, no fracture in absolute loyalty. The first piece of armor attaches according to protocol, the precise sequence of 27 steps initiated without hesitation, without question. The undersuit first, then the chest plate, the shoulder guards. Each component locking into place with satisfying clicks, with the rightness of function restored, of purpose reaffirmed, of service continuing without interruption. The helmet comes last, heavy in hands that lift it with practiced motion, with reverence appropriate to its significance, to the transformation it completes. The weight settles around my head with the comfort of rightness, of belonging. The seals engage with a soft hiss. The internal systems activate immediately, connect with the implants beneath my scalp, restore the voice to its proper place as guide, as conscience, as the continuous presence that ensures compliance with protocol, with purpose, with perfect service. Return to duty, it instructs. Assignment Priority Alpha 3, Throne Room Security Detail effective immediately. I move without hesitation, without question. Exit the medical chamber with the measured pace of the Royal Guard. Pass through security checkpoints with the bold authorization inherent in the crimson uniform. In the perfect posture, in the force pike carried with precise balance, in the symbolic weight of the Emperor's trust restored through successful reconditioning. The throne room awaits at the end of my journey, massive doors swinging open to reveal the chamber designed to intimidate, to diminish all who enter before the presence seated at its far end. I assume my assigned position along the wall, motionless, vigilant, a statue of crimson and black whose purpose requires no thought, no identity, no fracture in perfect loyalty. The voice whispers approval as I settle into position, as breathing slows to the measured pace of guard duty, as enhanced senses catalog every detail of the room, every potential threat, every access point, every individual who approaches the throne, their postures, their movements, their emotional states betrayed through micro-expressions and unconscious gestures. Hours pass in perfect stillness, in unwavering vigilance, in the absence of thought beyond function, beyond purpose, beyond the perfect service restored through reconditioning, through chemical reset, through enhanced loyalty programming that has sealed the fracture, that has erased the doubt, that has removed whatever fragment of identity had persisted beyond its usefulness. When the delegation enters, I register their presence as potential threats to be evaluated, to be monitored for signs of deception, for the micro-expressions that betray hidden intent. My assigned position places me behind the throne, watching the supplicants with the detached assessment of the perfect guard, with the vigilance required by duty, by protocol, by unquestioning service. One delegate registers as familiar according to facial recognition systems, identified as returning diplomatic representative from recently subjugated world. Security file indicates previous audience without incident. Threat assessment minimal. Appearance noted as aging human male, distinguished, silver hair cropped in military style, data processed without emotional response, without recognition beyond functional identification, without the fracture that once permitted doubt to exist where only loyalty belongs. The Emperor acknowledges the delegation with practiced magnanimity, with the appearance of mercy conditional upon absolute compliance. With the performance of benevolence wrapped around calculated cruelty, I observe without judgment, without question, without anything beyond perfect vigilance in service to Imperial security, to the throne, to the will that has shaped me into the perfect instrument of its protection. The audience concludes without incident. The delegation departs under heavy escort, prisoners in all but name, hostages against their world's continued compliance. I remain at my post, motionless, silent, The perfect guard whose enhanced senses detect no threat, whose chemical balance maintains optimal vigilance, whose conditioning prevents anything beyond function, beyond purpose, beyond the perfect emptiness required for perfect service. That night no dreams disturb maintenance cycle. No fracture permits doubt to enter reconditioning consciousness. The voice whispers approval of optimal performance, of successful reintegration, of service continuing without interruption, without question, without the flaw that required correction. That has been sealed through chemical reset, through enhanced loyalty programming, through the complete surrender of whatever once existed beyond the crimson armor, beyond the narrow black visor, beyond the force pike carried with perfect balance. The Royal Guard exists as extension of the Emperor's will, as physical manifestation of Imperial power, as silent witness to the machinations that shape the galaxy. We have no names, no past, no identity beyond our function. The perfect servants created through selection, through conditioning, through the complete surrender of self to a greater purpose. I stand my post in crimson silence, in perfect vigilance, in unquestioning service to the throne, to Imperial security, to the will that has shaped me into the instrument of its protection. No fragment remains to question this purpose, this function, this perfect emptiness that defines the Royal Guard. No memory survives reconditioning to suggest I was ever anyone else, ever anything beyond the crimson statue whose silent presence inspires fear throughout the galaxy, whose unwavering loyalty serves as example to all who would demonstrate devotion to Imperial order, whose perfect emptiness represents the ideal toward which all servants of the Empire should aspire. The voice whispers approval as I complete another cycle of perfect service, as enhanced senses detect no threat to the throne, as chemical balance maintains optimal vigilance without fracture, without doubt, without anything beyond the function assigned during selection, reinforced through conditioning, restored through reconditioning when flaws appeared that required correction. The perfect guard requires perfect emptiness, the perfect servant requires perfect loyalty. The perfect instrument requires perfect function without question, without hesitation, without identity beyond purpose. I stand in crimson silence, in unwavering vigilance, in the absence that defines us all beneath the weight of our helmets, behind the narrow black visors that reveal nothing of what exists within, that conceal the perfect emptiness where men once stood, where doubt once existed, where identity once persisted beyond its usefulness, until nothing remains but the armor, the vigilance, the unquestioning service that continues without interruption, without fracture, without end.